Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the DD Geopolitics podcast. I am joined by my very good friend and guest host, Kahlissee, and our guest for today is Pieter Friedrich, a freelance journalist who specializes in current and historical affairs of South Asia and a focus on Hindu nationalism. He is an acclaimed author and writer of books such as Sikh Caucus, India at a Crossroads, and his most recent, Saffron America. Pieter, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, and I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
So I do want to give a little bit of background for our listeners and also myself. How did you become kind of infatuated or involved in India in particular?
Well, infatuated, I haven't heard that one before. Fascinated, I've heard. I would probably, for the sake of PR, pick more like devoted to the issue. It's a long story, and at this point, the reason that I'm so entrenched in the issue has a lot to do with I've become so entangled with it. My name is so deeply connected to it. Basically, everybody that I interact with on a day-to-day basis is Indian origin, and I've even to at this point become de facto banned from the country of India. A couple of years ago, I was named at a press conference by the Delhi police, and so I've become rather inextricably entangled with the issue. But it began about 17 years ago. So I'm going on almost 2 decades of engagement with issues related to India, which have, from the origin of it, been primarily focused from what I'm doing, primarily focused on issues of human rights in India, and then South Asia as well, but with a real emphasis on India, considering that India constitutes the vast bulk of the South Asian region. I chance encounter some people who were Indian Americans, immigrants to my country, and who were involved in trying to raise awareness about particular issues at that time related to what's known as encounter killings by Indian police, which is like a staged murder of a civilian by Indian police, which was a big deal at that time, still is. Also trying to raise awareness about issues from the past, such as the 1984 Sikh genocide, which occurred in Delhi. So along the way, as I encountered these people and began learning about these issues that were near and dear to their hearts, I started to meet people who were in California, where I grew up, who had been victims of some of these atrocities. They've been survivors of the 1984 Sikh genocide, or they were the children, for instance, of human rights advocates in India who'd actually been murdered, or they'd been in custody in India in the past and tortured in custody. And I began from there, at their invitation, to really research these issues and read about India and the history of both current and past of India, and then progressively started writing about it. And so it was not an overnight thing as far as my infatuation with the region developing. It really was progressive. It evolved over a period of now almost 2 decades. Throughout that period, I ended up progressively meeting people from all backgrounds from India, a lot of Indian American immigrants initially, being as this was the country that I live in, and encountering people from Sikh backgrounds, Muslim backgrounds, people who were Dalits, those formerly known as untouchables within the Hindu caste system, and began encountering a number of progressive Hindus and others, and just digging into and unraveling the rather complicated, complex, sometimes tragic history of modern India in particular. And then getting involved over the years in engaging with issues such as the anti-caste struggle, with caste still being a major factor in the social fabric and framework of India. Getting involved in issues here in my own country of advocating for congressional resolutions that sought to highlight issues of human rights in India and sought to center US-India dialogues on raising those issues of human rights. Then also over the past 9 years or so, after this current Modi government came into power in India, I began to really shift the bulk of my attention to researching, writing about, exposing, speaking about the issues of Hindu nationalism, the origins of the Hindu nationalist movement, what it's doing in India today, what its goals are, and also especially how it connects to America.
So Kahlissee and I have both been censored or deboosted on Twitter, but you have actually been banned in an entire country. So tell us how that came about and kind of how you're dealing with it and how that even happens.
Sure. Well, the how it happens is probably the easiest as far as from a technical perspective question to answer. It happens when I wake up in the morning and have an email from Twitter saying that there's been a legal demand from the government of India to block my account, and that Twitter has complied. And then I start getting DMs from followers of mine on Twitter who are living in India and writing to me and oftentimes sending me screenshots saying, "What happened, Peter? Like, we can't access your account anymore." How am I dealing with it? And what's the reason for it? Well, the reason for it is that I have emerged as a major thorn in the side of the current Modi regime in India. They know who I am and they don't like what I do. And neither do their support base here in America like what I do. I have now been banned on Twitter in India twice this year. This is the second time. The first time was in about mid-March when I put out a tweet that went semi-viral for purposes of the niche that I'm in. Got several thousand likes and retweets, in which I talked about an ongoing situation at the time in the northwestern Indian state of Punjab, where the government there was attempting to arrest an individual and alleging that he was involved in things like attempted murder and stuff like that. And in the process of attempting to arrest him, they implemented a statewide crackdown on the entire population of Punjab, which meant that they instituted curfews. They cut the internet. They had an internet blackout for several tens of millions of people. They conducted mass arrests of hundreds of other people who were peripherally connected to this gentleman that they were attempting to arrest, and so on and so forth. And I basically just put out a comment on Twitter saying that this kind of mass suspension of civil liberties is impermissible in any kind of secular democracy, and that there is no excuse for imprisoning an entire population in order to attempt to effect the arrest of a single individual. That went viral, as I said, within like probably about 48 hours. I woke up and found that my account had been withheld and banned in India. And I initially found that out because people who a lot of my follower base on Twitter is India based, and many of them were DMing me and alerting me to the fact that they could no longer access my account. And actually, it took a couple of days on that occasion for me to even get the formal email from Twitter informing me that it had been banned. That lasted for about maybe 6 or 7 weeks. And then one fine day I woke up and as I recall, I don't think I even got any notification from Twitter in this case, but I woke up and discovered a bunch of DMs from people in India saying, "We can see your account again. How'd you get it back?" And I wasn't the only one who had their account banned in that wave. There were an estimated, I think, about 120, 130 other accounts that were banned all within the same 1 or 2 day time span. That were mostly accounts of Sikhs or Punjabis, mostly within the diaspora, like US based or UK, Canada based, who all had their accounts similarly banned. It was reported on. I think it might have made it into Newsweek, and I think Vice covered it, and some of these major international outlets covered it. Well, so anyways, my account was restored. Fast forward from when it was restored, I think probably about early May to now August 7. Between early May and August 7, I had a real wave of success on India Twitter in terms of my account grew by probably about 25, 30,000 followers from the time that my account was restored on Twitter in early May to late June. I was in Washington, D.C. because Modi, as the Prime Minister of India, was coming over to be hosted for a state visit in D.C. And so I was there to protest him. I managed to get a hashtag, which the hashtag I used is actually escaping me at the moment. I'd have to pull that up again to remember it. But I managed to get a hashtag about opposing Modi's visit trending on India Twitter within the 1 or 2 days before he even arrived in the U.S. I did a quick little photo op with some posters comparing Modi to Hitler and accusing Biden of enabling Modi's fascism, and did that in front of the White House like maybe 2 days before Modi arrived in country. Popped that up on Twitter. I think that got, within the first day or two, that got like 3 million impressions. It got 40, 50,000 likes and retweets. Got covered in Indian media just prior to Modi's arrival. So I was drawing a lot of negative attention to Modi and getting a lot more traction in spreading awareness of opposition to him in India itself after my account was restored from the first ban. And then after that, within about a month after that, from June 22, when Modi visited, to I think about July 25, I again managed to kind of make some waves when I launched a hunger strike targeted with a demand towards the key member of U.S. Congress responsible for inviting Modi to address a joint session of U.S. Congress back in June. And I launched this hunger strike and conducted it for about 9 days. And that drew, again, quite a high level of awareness. got a lot of attention back in India, got covered by some mainstream media here in the US, made quite a mark because for several days I actually was conducting the strike within the congressman's district in California, and even got a chance to attend a constituent town hall event where hosted by this congressman, where I questioned him on camera about why he refused to concede to the demands of my hunger strike. And so then again, made a lot of waves. So after this first ban, came back, I was again able to be to reach and to reach an Indian audience, which is crucial in what I do, because among many other things, it provides a huge amount of encouragement to these Indian dissidents or dissenters to the regime, who otherwise are themselves oftentimes unable to raise their own voices because they face the threat of arrest or worse if they do so. Well, I concluded this hunger strike, like I said, drew a lot of attention, and it drew a lot of attention actually just within a few days of this congressman, Ro Khanna out of California, leading a congressional delegation to India, a formal congressional delegation to India, in which he met with high-level members of the Indian government, including, I believe, on that trip, Modi himself. So really kind of cast a shadow over his upcoming visit, really began sending a lot of negative vibes towards the Modi regime, and spreading awareness also here with that specific campaign that I was running at that time among an American, like a broad non-Indian American Christian population. Well, that prefaced me again waking up on August 7 and discovering that my account was once more banned due to a demand from the Indian government, with no specifics about them offering them, either the Indian government or Twitter, offering a rationale for the reason behind the ban, other than simply that apparently the Indian government doesn't think that I have right to exist in their country on Twitter. They haven't specified in any way that they claim that I've violated Indian law. They haven't specified in any way which Indian law. Twitter has not given any recourse or course of action for me to take in order to attempt to comply with Indian law so my account can be restored. And as it stands, I am now almost a month into my second Twitter ban of this year, and sitting, waiting and hoping that, just as previously happened, that maybe there's a chance that this will just again quietly be lifted by Twitter, after it's been held in place for some time. So we'll see. Now, wrapping up in response to how I'm dealing with it, I am dealing with it by attempting to continue using the other platforms that I have already developed. My mailing list, my Substack, my Instagram, my YouTube, and developing new ones. I just launched a podcast a couple of weeks ago, which you can find on Apple Podcasts. Just look up DOSA, D-O-S-A. And it'll pop right up, or my name. And that Apple Podcasts, from what I understand, does not ban me in India. So I have plenty of Indian listeners on that. And then I am beyond that, continuing to do my work, to research, write, and realize that although unfortunately my reach is on Twitter certainly extremely throttled now, because such a bulk of my following is in India, but that there is a eager audience here in the rest of the world, and certainly here in my own country, the US, that is ready and waiting to hear about these issues of what's happening in India, about violations of human rights ramping up in India, about how there's an impending genocide of minorities in India, and about how a lot of that is linked to us here in America. So I'm about ready in the next week or so to hit the road. I have a couple of speaking invitations. I'll be going traveling to Texas, traveling to North Carolina, traveling probably to Maryland and Washington, D.C., speaking to especially Indian American audiences, but also meeting with elected officials and that sort of thing.
So I want to back up because you mentioned Modi a couple of times. For someone like me who's quite ignorant about interior politics in India, and about their foreign policy. But so I've heard of the violence in Gujarat, even sometimes called a genocide. I believe that some observers even said that the events did meet the legal definitions of genocide, with Modi kind of taking the blame in the public arena, but then being absolved of the guilt by the Supreme Court of India, kind of like we investigate ourselves and found no wrongdoing. But can you kind of go through this sort of violence in Gujarat, how the government's involved, or how they're not involved, or why aren't we in the West hearing about it, because of India's allyship, or what is it? Because it's there. If you Google it, it comes right into your face. It's not hidden, but nobody's really talking about it.
Sure. What happened in Gujarat was in, I think, February 28th of 2002 until March 1 or March 2 of 2002, I believe. February, March of 2002. I would call it a pogrom at minimum. And it lasted for about 3 days. What happened was, and I'm going to have to back up and lay a little bit of groundwork for your listeners. What happened was there are these Hindu nationalist outfits in India, specific organizations which promote this ideology. The main one is called the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, or RSS. And this RSS organization was founded in 1925, almost 100 years ago, as a paramilitary organization that is all male. It's armed, it's uniformed, it conducts paramilitary drills, conducts paramilitary marches that we've seen. You could probably visualize it similar to something like Hamas marches or Hezbollah marches. They look very similar to what the RSS does. It conducts marches through cities and that sort of thing. It conducts ideological training, and it also works to place its members, who are Hindu nationalist devotees, into positions of society and politics. Like the RSS works to place its members into the police forces, into educational systems, into well, basically any bureaucratic system that you could envision. Over the past 100 years, it's been doing this, and the RSS is devoted to a couple of goals. It's devoted to the goal of turning India into a official Hindu nation, because it believes that India is, always has been, and always should be a nation of Hindus and only for Hindus. Specifically, as a related goal to that, targets for basically like ethnic cleansing from the land, Christians and Muslims in particular, from Indian Christians and Muslims in particular. It specifically views Indian Christians and Muslims as as foreign elements within the land because their faiths, their religions originate from outside of India. It views them as internal threats to the country because they're foreign, and it views them as traitors to the nation because of not being Hindu. The RSS believes that in order to be a true patriot of India, you have to be a Hindu. And so with those two ideological goals of turning India into a Hindu nation and eliminating especially Christians, Indian Christians and Muslims from the land, the RSS has developed over nearly the past century and become today an organization which is approximately 6 million members strong, an organization which has seized control of most major institutions within the country, and an organization which whose members are now in positions of office, like the prime ministership. For instance, Modi, who I mentioned, is a lifelong member of the RSS who joined this paramilitary when he was about 8 years old. His like lieutenant, really, this gentleman named Amit Shah, is a lifelong member of the RSS, who's now the home minister of the country, meaning he's in charge of internal law and order for India. Believe variously the president, the vice president of the country are and or have been members of the RSS, and recent counts in the past couple of years have estimated that about 75% of the national cabinet are all members, or all are or have been members of this RSS organization. Now, within leading up to Gujarat 2002, within this framework of the RSS as this original Hindu nationalist organization promoting that ideology, the RSS over the past century has founded a host of basically subsidiary or affiliate organizations which serve kind of special purposes for promoting the RSS's Hindu nationalist ideology within various distinct fields. There's a lot of them, and it's kind of an alphabet soup for people that are new to this issue. And so I'm not going to get into that too much, but in order to grasp the way that it's worked and also to talk about Gujarat 2002, there's a couple major ones which have to be named. So, for instance, the RSS is like the original mothership organization of the Hindu nationalist movement, founded in 1925. Shortly, I think about 10 years or so later, they founded a student organization for universities called the ABVP. In the 1960s, they founded like a cultural or religious wing called the VHP. And then in the 1980s, they founded a couple of other groups. One group called the Bajrang Dal, when this Bajrang Dal, founded in the 80s, is like the youth wing of the VHP, which is the cultural religious wing of the RSS. And then in the 1980s, big important one here, the RSS founded the BJP as its political wing, which is the party to which Modi belongs. And so the VHP and the Bajrang Dal in particular have actually been, as far as RSS anti-minority violence, typically the kind of the foot soldiers who are the ones at the forefront engaging in the actual shedding of blood. And that's what happened in 2002. In 2002, Modi had just become chief minister of the state of Gujarat, which is in eastern India. And chief minister is basically it's like the head of state of the state, like the governor of a state for equivalent for those of us in America. Modi had been in office, excuse me, as the chief minister for I think about 4 or 5 months at the time. He had, when he took office, no credentials to his name, no claim to fame other than that he had been a lifelong member of the RSS, serving since the age of about 21 as a full-time RSS worker, basically like a ideological missionary for the RSS who's at their beck and call, who does nothing except do RSS work, go around the country, build up the organization. And that was the only thing that Modi had done at the time that he actually took office as the chief minister of the state of Gujarat. When he took office, he actually was at that point not even elected into office. He was appointed as a replacement for another chief minister from the same BJP party who'd kind of fallen into disgrace. And then within those first few months, there was this pogrom against Muslims that broke out. What happened was that there was a train full of Hindu nationalist devotees who were returning from this one contested site, returning back to Gujarat, and something happened. The train was attacked, and it's still a dispute exactly what occurred or why, but the train was attacked and set on fire, and about 50, I think almost 60 Hindu nationalists from this Hindu nationalist civilians from this movement burned alive in this train. The Modi government in the state of Gujarat immediately jumped on the situation. Initially accused foreign elements. They accused Pakistan of being involved, and they cited it as an instance of cross-border international terrorism with no evidence, and then began kind of fanning the flames of tension that were naturally resulting as an outcome of this tragedy. And they began, they cooperated with this VHP organization, this Hindu nationalist group that's the religious wing of the RSS, as the VHP called for a statewide shutdown, as the VHP took the bodies of these victims, their charred bodies, and paraded them 50, 100 miles or so back to the capital of the state on camera, treating them as martyrs, during this statewide shutdown. And then systematic violence began breaking out against Muslims in, I believe, about a dozen cities around the state, where for about 3 days, armed mobs who were equipped with rolls of voters that identified, which from those rolls you could identify, looking at the names, for instance, where Muslims live, rolls of voters, and apparently driving around in trucks, began targeting Muslim neighborhoods and attacking mosques, homes, businesses, and pulling Muslims out into the streets and slaughtering them, burning them alive, hacking them to death, gang raping them, and so on and so forth. And as this occurred, and in the reports that emerged afterwards and the accounts from the survivors, what was happening during this pogrom, during this systematic slaughter, was that the police in the state, who were under the control of the Modi government, which was a BJP Hindu nationalist government, the police either did nothing, passively stood by and watched the mobs, or in many occasions actually joined in the violence, when Muslims were being attacked and attempted to fight back, the police would fire on them and then subdue them and then pull back and allow the Hindu nationalist mobs to go in and that sort of thing. The mobs were chanting slogans along the way over this 3-day massacre about how the police are with them, and also about how Modi is with us. Subsequently, when the whole thing ended and the investigations began, there were many different reports that fingered Modi as anywhere from as culpable on a range of anywhere from basically being passive and allowing it to actually orchestrating it. And some of the things that were claimed included whistleblowers who were from the police, who were senior police officers, who said that there were meetings held behind closed doors at the outset of the violence, in which police were given orders not to quell the violence and not to step in and stop the attackers, stop the mobs. There was a member of the cabinet from Modi's own political party, the BJP, who blew the whistle and basically said that Modi was culpable, that he orchestrated the violence. And again, this is a member of Modi's own cabinet, or from his own political party. Gentleman was soon after making that allegation was assassinated. There were perpetrators of the violence who were caught on camera in a media sting a couple of years later, who belonged to organizations like the RSS, or who were members of the BJP, who were politicians, who on camera, on video, agreed, boasted about how they had participated in the violence with no regrets for doing so, and alleged that Modi was personally involved in allowing them to do it and to subsequently get away with it. And so for a long time afterwards, Modi was viewed as basically responsible for the violence. And certainly the US government found the evidence compelling because after this 2002 pogrom in 2005, Modi was invited as a speaker to an event in the US, and the US State Department responded by actually formally revoking his visa and coming out with a declaration that they were denying him entry to the US because at the time of this 2002 violence, being the head of the state, that the US State Department found that Modi was responsible for these egregious violations of religious freedom. And then within India itself, especially within a lot of mainstream Indian media, he was widely viewed as the butcher of Gujarat and considered responsible for the violence. For about a decade, there were all kinds of investigations into him by different courts at varying levels, state and national level. And wrapping up, because now Modi is, as mentioned, now he's today Prime Minister of India. He's welcomed actually now in America, despite being formally banned. Note on that, the ban on Modi's entry into the US was never even actually lifted. He just has a workaround today, which is that as the head of state of India, he has diplomatic immunity. And so the US, in order to avoid a major international incident, has chosen not to enforce the ban that they formerly placed, even though they haven't lifted it. But with these investigations into Modi in India, his supporters have spun the narrative and basically said that, well, Modi was exonerated. That Modi got, the term is clean chit they use, is kind of a common term within Indian rhetoric, and that the courts have looked at it, the Supreme Court has looked at it, and he's been cleared of all wrongdoing, which is absolutely not the case. Basically, what happened was when it finally made its way up to the Supreme Court, and there was a special investigative team that was formed by the Supreme Court. This team ultimately came back and concluded in their final report that there is simply not enough evidence to charge Modi. So he was never charged, meaning he never went to trial, and so he was never acquitted, as you would be if you go to trial. He was never exonerated. He was simply not charged because the conclusion was that there was not enough evidence to take him to court. However, in light of a real host of all of the evidences that I've just gone through, it seems absolutely clear that Modi is at absolute minimum culpable in terms of allowing the violence to happen, especially considering that the violence, as has been widely concluded by reports from the US government, reports from European governments, reports from international human rights outfits like Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, that the perpetrators came from these groups like the RSS, the VHP, the Bajrang Dal, the BJP, all groups which, Modi himself is actually a member of the RSS. Modi himself is actually a member of the BJP. So this violence was certainly perpetrated by outfits to which Modi himself belongs. And then, as I've just gone through, even the perpetrators have come out and claimed responsibility for the violence and named Modi as responsible for giving them a free hand to pull the violence off and then get away with it, with impunity for it afterwards.
Thank you so much, Peter. When I've read up about the Gujarat riots, obviously there were, hundreds and thousands of horrific cases of a murder, lynching, rape, burning, setting entire villages alight. But the one that really sticks to my mind, simply because it actually came back in a profound way last year, is the case of Bilkis Bano. And if I just give a 30-second recap on that and then ask you the question. So Bilkis Bano was one of the women from one of these villages in Gujarat when the genocide happened. And she was fleeing the village with, I believe, 11 members of her family. She was pregnant herself. Her sister had just given birth. She had a 3-year-old child with her. And the entire, all the females in the family were raped, mass raped by a gang of men. And then every single member of her family was killed and she was left for dead, but she survived. She fought the battle of her life. She went to the police, and the police, I believe, had those bodies buried very quickly of all her family members to get rid of any DNA, therefore showing their complicity in the genocide. And then she got the case transferred, I believe, from Gujarat to another city, Mumbai, and the Supreme Court ruled that the bodies had to be dug up for DNA evidence. And then those guys were convicted. And they were all given life sentences for mass rape and murder. Her child was killed. She miscarried. Her sister lost the baby that was born 2 days before her sister was killed after being raped. It was horrific. They were given life in prison. And then last year, they were released. The case was taken back to Gujarat, where Modi still has, though he's a prime minister today, a lot of power. And they were all released. But what's horrific about this is that they weren't released as murderers and rapists. They were released, from the images that I saw and the videos that I saw, as heroes. Celebrated, adorned. I believe some of them may have even shared a platform with BJP ministers now. So government ministers are actually, kind of sharing platforms with them to give them credibility. So please correct me if anything here is inaccurate, but what I want to ask you about is just a couple of things. So first, there are now, I see so many stories of rape being used, weaponized as a tool for this kind of impending genocide, number one. And number two, I don't see there being the kind of government action against this. There's no kind of even rhetoric around it. There's nothing. There's silence. It's like, go and do it. It's fine as long as you don't do it to, women of the upper class, the people who do believe in the RSS, the Hindutva ideology people, but do it to the minority communities, be that Dalits, be that recently we've seen in Manipur the Kuki community, or be that Muslim women. So I just want you to talk a little bit about that, please, because I think that's really profound what's happening right now in India, if you could.
Sure. Well, yes. As far as what you're saying about the Bilkis Bano case, everything that you said, I believe that's accurate. Bilkis Bano was one of the survivors of this 2002 pogrom in Gujarat, and she was, as you mentioned, I think about 11 members of her family or so were fleeing altogether from the violence. And as I recall, 7 of them ended up actually being killed, including her 3-year-old daughter, who was killed in front of her. Bilkis Bano, who at the time, as I recall, was pregnant, was gang raped by the mob. And then although there was a lot of impunity for many, if not most, of the perpetrators of all of this violence, some of those who were convicted and imprisoned included Bilkis Bano's attackers, who, they murdered her family, they gang raped her, they slaughtered her 3-year-old daughter in front of her. And last year, they got early release because of, I guess, good behavior in prison, and despite the fact that they were serving life sentences. And to add insult to injury, they were released last year on August 15, which is India's Independence Day. So happy birthday, India! We're going to set free a gang of rapists and murderers. Then when they walked out of jail, they were, yes, greeted as heroes, and their relatives were there, garlanding them with flowers, kissing their feet, giving them sweets, and giving them a real warm homecoming ceremony, as though they are heroes, which is, as I'll get to in a minute, so illustrative of the environment and the climate of hatred which has taken over in India today and over the past 9 years since the Modi regime came into power. Well, and as you mentioned, since then, they have these men who were walked out of jail after being sentenced to life for murder and rape. Some of them have been at events, ceremonies in the company, on stage, if I'm not mistaken, of members of the BJP elected officials from both the state legislature, from as well as from the national parliament. This incident does, yes, really exemplify this kind of weaponization of rape, which is rather central to especially the Hindu nationalist ideology, which currently has an iron grip on India. And it's rooted actually in manifestos written by some of the original Hindu nationalist ideologues, tracing back to the 1920s, 1930s, 1940s. And specifically, there was one manifesto written by a man named V.D. Savarkar, who is like the ideological godfather of the entire modern Hindu nationalist movement. In one of these manifestos, V.D. Savarkar talks about very openly how rape should be weaponized. He advocates for it. With this, he does this within the framework of like this historical grievance that Hindu nationalism has, and this is one of the things about Hindu nationalism which makes it such a mirror of the fascist ideology. And I know it's popular and cliche to throw around the term fascist, to apply it to anything that we disagree with. But it is, in the case of Hindu nationalism, completely apropos and 110% accurate to use, unlike almost any other usage of the term that I could think of in the modern world. The reason is that Hindu nationalism and the RSS originated in the 1920s, 1930s in India, at the exact same time that the Nazis were originating and developing in Germany, and that the fascists, Mussolini's black shirts, and his movement over in Italy was formulating. And as the Hindu nationalist organizations were founded and developed in historical parallel with those original European fascist groups, the Hindu nationalist ideologues were very well aware of what was happening in Europe, and looked over at the development of the fascists in Italy and the Nazis in Germany, and overtly in their manifestos, openly, blatantly, pointed to those European fascist movements as a model for what they wanted to develop in India, and then variously elaborated and explicated their ideology in ways where they specifically called out aspects of the European fascist ideology which they admired, wanted to emulate, etc., including very specifically pointing to the way that they saw Jews being treated in Germany as being what they considered to be a model for how especially Muslims ought to be treated in India. In so many words, actually, this man, V.D. Savarkar, in so many words, actually said that the goal was to treat Indian Muslims the same way that German Jews are treated. So, getting back to the weaponization of race aspect of all of this, this godfather of the Hindu nationalist movement, V.D. Savarkar, who, as I just said, explicitly compared the desire to, or explicitly compared the treatment of German Jews to how he wanted Indian Muslims to be treated. Had a lot of mirrored ideas, had a lot of ideas ideologically that mirrored the fascist ideology. The state is supreme above all else. There's no greater goal for a citizen in a country to aspire to than to sacrifice their life on behalf of the state. We need uniformity, conformity, etc., blah, blah, blah. And that there's been this lost golden age that we need to restore, which certainly in context of Nazi Germany was what they were aspiring for. They wanted to restore the lost golden age of Germany when the Holy Roman Empire, for instance, and get back to those good old times when everything was perfect and Germany, Germany was über alles. In context of India, the Hindu nationalist ideologues like V.D. Savarkar had this view that thousands of years ago, that India was this vast, sprawling, idyllic, utopian empire, this glorious Indian empire, which had been lost due to things like, from their perspective, the invasion of outsiders who came in and destroyed that glorious Indian culture, glorious Hindu culture, which once dominated the region and the land. And V.D. Savarkar laid the groundwork for what still dominates the Hindu nationalist mindset today. This idea that the primary enemy of India is Islam, is Muslims, identifying historical events from the 1100s, the 1500s, etc., in which there had been conquering forces from Central Asia who were Muslim, who came in and conquered India, or the Indian subcontinent more accurately, and ruled large parts of that region for some hundreds of years before they were finally overthrown by the British coming in and colonizing India, or the Indian subcontinent. That historical reality is something that V.D. Savarkar pointed to as the chief historical grievance of the Hindu nationalist movement, that Muslims came in from their perspective and subjugated us Hindus and invaded, occupied, and dominated us for hundreds of years, and did things like mistreated our women, dishonored our women, raped our women. And that therefore, in order to kind of reset the balance, in order to pay them back and restore our lost golden age, we Hindus, we need to do stuff like treat the Muslims living in India the same way that they supposedly treated us hundreds of years ago when they were subjugating us. And so from that perspective, V.D. Savarkar, in his ideology, written down in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, as he's all simultaneously looking over at and admiring the European fascists, he specifically articulates and advocates for Hindu nationalists in the Indian subcontinent to do things like weaponized rape by systematically targeting Muslim women for sexual violence. And that ideology, I mean, it's one thing to have an ideology, it's another thing to put it into practice, but we've seen that being now almost 100 years later, as this Hindu nationalist movement, which was formulated way back when, has today taken over the Republic of India. We've seen that ideology being put into practice, manifesting in incidents of actual weaponization of rape, especially against religious minority women, like in the case of Bilkis Bano in 2002 in Gujarat. Or more recently, in the case in the northeastern states of Manipur, where still ongoing, where in May 3rd, so June, July, August, September, 4 months ago today, 4 months ago in the northeastern Indian state of Manipur, violence broke out, basically a massacre erupted against a Christian majority tribal community, with the perpetrators being paramilitary organizations that are sympathetic to and have been groomed by the RSS, and the violence being perpetrated against these tribal Christians by these paramilitary groups that are linked to the state government of Manipur, that are operating with support from the state police forces, and that basically have the backing of the BJP-controlled state government there in Manipur, and the silent sanction of the national BJP government in Delhi. And in one specific case of violence, this violence has been ongoing for about 4 months now, targeting primarily tribal Christians, with the backing of the BJP state government. It's seen anywhere from 100 to a couple hundred or possibly more Christians murdered. It's seen 300, 400, 500 churches torched, burned down, thousands of homes destroyed, tens and tens of thousands of people displaced, sent into like either fleeing to find refuge outside of the state or sent into camps. There's been a lot of sexual violence that has accompanied it. Quite a number of different incidents, but one in particular that was caught on video and that went viral, got international press, and really kind of shone a spotlight on the ongoing atrocity, ongoing massacre there in Manipur. And that was an incident which occurred in the early days of the violence beginning in May of this year, but did not actually have the video of that violence, which occurred in early May, emerge until actually I think July 19. So May, June, almost 2 months after the incident occurred is when the video was finally leaked, and international press picked it up. It was an incident where 2 women from this tribal Christian community who were surrounded by a mob of apparently as many as hundreds of people, which included, as I recall, also some women, were stripped naked, paraded down a road, and sexually abused while on camera. And then off camera, they were taken into a field and either one or both of the women were gang raped, and I believe the brother of one of the women who was apparently there was murdered by the mob. The women subsequently, when this video of the attack emerged, which, to note, this video was recorded by the perpetrators, who had no hesitation, no fear of filming themselves committing this crime on camera. The women subsequently, when the issue, the video emerged and the issue drew mass attention, reported that before they ended up in the hands of the mob, they had actually been in the hands of the police. And the police had picked the women up from a nearby village and taken them off into some rural area where this mob had assembled. And in the words of the women, that the police handed us over into the hands of the mob. Now, this is one of the most notable and incidents in terms of how much press it's gained, but it's only one example of many other similar attacks, gang rapes, which have been occurring in this ongoing, and I emphasize ongoing, situation in Manipur. And again, bringing things to the modern day, this present year, this present past few months, back from the 2002 incident in Gujarat that we were talking about, bringing things forward to the modern day really exemplifies how the Hindu nationalist movement weaponizes rape, and in terms of its ideology, and then implements that in terms of committing atrocities in the streets right now, today. How it weaponizes that against religious minority women. How there's generally, when it's a situation where the Hindu nationalist movement controls the state forces, it's generally a situation where the state forces are complicit in the attacks, and so on and so forth.
One last question. I'm going to try to squeeze it in. So to focus more on your very active work in the United States, you mentioned a little bit earlier about your hunger strike, so I wanted to come back to that. It was a 9-day hunger strike. I believe it was a 0-calorie hunger strike, and this was after doing a roadshow across the country. So could you tell us a little bit more about the roadshow, how the hunger strike came about, how it went, and what you did consume while you were on it?
Sure. It was a 0-calorie hunger strike for 9 days. I think technically about, by the time I actually broke it, it was probably about 9.5 days. Um, and Well, it wasn't technically immediately after I did a roadshow. I do roadshows frequently, all the time. Last year, I was on the road for probably about 3 months out of the year, traveling around maybe 6 or 7 different states in the US. And I go on the road at the invitation of local Indian American communities throughout the US. Excuse me. And for instance, last year was in Texas. I think I was in the Dallas region of Texas for about 3 weeks in December. The reason in that situation that I was in Texas was because of a specific incident which had occurred in the Dallas region, where a local nonprofit organization, which is a Hindu nationalist organization based in Dallas area, had hosted a fundraiser in which the stated goal of their fundraiser included things like raising money to support the demolition of churches back in India. And that the fact that a nonprofit organization in America could so brazenly host a fundraiser on our free American soil to support basically attacks on the rights of religious minorities back in India was unsurprisingly rather shocking to the Indian American population in Dallas, which is quite a sizable one. So they invited me to go out there and raise awareness about that particular incident. And I went out there, and that incident was one of the silver linings of it is that it led to a lot of interfaith cooperation between Christians and Muslims and Sikhs and Hindus and other people all of Indian origin. And so did a lot of things, went out there and went to the city council meeting in the city where this fundraiser had actually been hosted, a city called Frisco, Texas. And one of the things we have here in almost every city council in America is a segment where they open up the floor for a period of time during the meeting for public comment, where any member of the public, and you don't even have to necessarily be a resident of the city, can sign up to speak for generally about 2 to 3 minutes on any issue of concern to that member of the public, as long as it has, something to do with the city. And so we went to that Frisco City Council meeting, and I signed up, as did about a dozen other people, Sikhs, Christians, Indian Christians, Indian Muslims, Indian Christian pastor from the area, etc., to speak in the public comments and demand the city to announce that fundraiser that had been hosted in their city, and to just generally call attention to this, the city's attention to the fact that this was happening in their backyard. We packed out the city council chambers with probably about 100, 120 other people who were there. They didn't speak, but they were there in support of us who did speak. Over the next couple of weeks, we did things like organized a rally in front of the city council, where I was one of the speakers. Probably had 100, 150 people at that rally. We organized a press conference of Christians, again, in front of the city council. And then while I was there in town, I had some kind of closed door meetings alongside in cooperation with the Indian American community, had some closed door meetings with elected officials, with members of law enforcement, that sort of thing, in order to at least draw their attention to the issue, make sure that they were aware of how deep a concern it is for so much of the local Indian American community there in Dallas, and urge them to, if possible, take some kind of an action. And then in addition to that, I did something else while I was there, which I often do on a lot of my other roadshows, which is I went around to several other local cities, including the city of Dallas itself, and signed up to speak in the public comments, and spoke at that time in context of how this issue had just happened with this fundraiser by this nonprofit for raising money to send overseas to support the demolition of churches in India, and then more broadly, using it as an opportunity to more broadly raise awareness within the city about how they need to know that this is not the only local Hindu nationalist organization operating in America or in this region, that there are actually much more mainstream Hindu nationalist organizations that are actually more likely to be approaching you, the city, and seeking your engagement and seeking your stamp of approval in various ways. I would cite many examples of how that had already happened with some of these other more mainstream internationalist organizations, specifically one called the HSS, which is the international wing of the RSS, which, maybe if we have time to someday soon do a part 2, I would love to highlight what the HSS is, how they operate, and how a lot of my work has been oriented around exposing them, because they operate around the world and in the US as I said, the international wing of this RSS paramilitary back in India. And so I would go and I spoke at city councils about that. And so in doing my roadshows, and I've got one or two coming up this month. Actually, I've got one coming up this week. I'll be in North Carolina. In doing these, what I do is I always do it. I go out at the invitation of the local Indian American community. I oftentimes do it when there's been a specific incident that has occurred, and I will do things like I'll go and tour around the local city councils, picking which city to go to based off of criteria like has this city had some kind of a engagement with or platforming of this HSS organization, this US wing of the RSS. Has the city platformed PHSS at some point? If they have, I definitely want to try and speak at that city. Is the city holding a meeting in a time frame that fits with the time that I'm already going to be there? And is it a major city? Because I do prefer to speak at major cities. Like it was awesome getting the chance to speak at Dallas. I've gotten the chance in the past to last year to speak at the Chicago City Council. I've spoken at Houston. I've spoken at this point, I think I spoke at Annapolis, Maryland. This year I've spoken at, I think, a couple of capital cities in different states. And then I also do stuff like I attend, like I said, some of these closed door meetings organized by and in collaboration with the local Indian American community, meeting with elected officials and people like that, or bureaucrats, civil service. I also speak at rallies and help to organize protests, depending on if there's an issue that deserves to be protested. Speak at seminars. Last year, one of the things I did was I spoke in Chicago region in Illinois at probably about 10 or a dozen mosques. Just did kind of a lecture circuit at mosques, speaking for anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour about the issue of Hindu nationalism, educating people about what it is, what Hindu nationalists are doing in India and how it connects to us here in America, how we have American Hindu nationalist organizations that are serving as a support base for the movement back in India. And coming up, as I go to North Carolina this week, one of the things that I'll be doing is I believe that the local community is organizing a book launch for me for my new book, Saffron America. And then I'm joining a seminar panel of I'll be one of 3 speakers, I believe, this coming weekend. And then looking forward to hopefully also speaking at a couple of major cities. Don't want to name drop them just yet until after I've done them, but a couple of major cities in the states which are holding city council meetings while I'm there, and going and attending them and just kind of educating them about the problem of Hindu nationalism and its presence here in America.
Peter, I'd like to thank you so much, because what you've just shared on this podcast, across what you've done to raise awareness of the atrocities across India, but more importantly, the projection you're giving to the future of where this could go, and raise awareness not only of what's happened, but where it's going in the future, and the influence that's growing of the RSS Hindutva ideology, especially across America. I know that this is the end of the first podcast with you. Didi and I would like to thank you very much for joining us. We would like to then, in the second part, continue talking about the 2 books that you have actually written and published. One of them very recently, called Saffron America, and the first one called Saffron Fascist. So I look forward to speaking to you about those in the coming podcasts.
If I can just actually, technically, I've got 4 full-length books written, published, and 2 or 3 short, more booklet type books of anywhere from 40 to 60, 70 pages. As mentioned at the outset, I believe by Didi, you were talking about it. Some of my books include topics related to South Asian issues, which are not dealing with Hindu nationalism. I've written a booklet about Gandhi, for instance, which is rather critical of him, examining some events in his life and going through some of his writings. I've written, last year, I wrote a booklet called India at a Crossroads, Hindu nationalist efforts to eliminate or eradicate Christianity, which covers the Hindu nationalist view of Indian Christians, their persecution of Indian Christians, the reasons behind it, the ways in which it's manifesting today, discusses ways in which how there's been past persecution, but explains why the present persecution is so much more severe, how it's so much more severe, etc. I've written a book called Sikh Caucus, Siege in Delhi, Surrender in Washington, which is been a bestseller among the global Sikh diaspora, and which is delving into a rather niche issue, sold surprisingly well, considering it's such a niche issue, but an issue dealing with this special interest grouping that we have in U.S. Congress called a caucus, and talking about the American Sikh Congressional Caucus, and kind of dissecting it, its origins, its inner workings, and coming to very critical conclusions about it. And then I've got another book. This was actually my first one, co-authored it back in 2017, called Captivating the Simple-Hearted, which is basically a historical examination of the origins of the Sikh religion and how it originated to a large extent more as a social movement, also as a religion, but more as a social movement to promote equality and to oppose caste in the Indian subcontinent. That book has actually been translated at this point, I believe, into about half a dozen different Indian origin languages like Punjabi, Hindi, Tamil, Telugu, Malayalam, etc. Then my two books, which are primarily about the Hindu nationalist movement. My first one came out in 2020. It's called Saffron Fascists, India's Hindu nationalist rulers. And that book is really basically the key primer to introduce a reader to the issue of what is Hindu nationalism, what is the RSS, what are their goals, what do they believe, what have they done in the past, and how have they developed over the past 100 years to the point that they've taken over India. And then my newest book, which dropped on August 7, the exact same day that I also got once again banned on Twitter in India, is called Saffron America, India's Hindu Nationalist Project at Work in the US. And that's, I think, my longest to date. It's about 370 pages. It's a comprehensive overview of the topic of Hindu nationalism through the lens of what is the Hindu nationalist movement doing in America, and how is the American Hindu nationalist family of organizations supporting the movement back in India.
Well, I want to thank you both once again for joining us, and all of you, our listeners. Peter, please let our listeners know where they can find you maybe on Twitter and all your other platforms.
Well, hopefully you can find me on Twitter. I'm on Twitter, just under my name on pretty much every platform. Search my name. I'm on Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and now on Apple Podcasts. And with my newest, not just newest, but my first podcast releasing a couple of weeks ago. I've got episodes coming out every Friday, and it's called Dialoguing on South Asia with Pieter Friedrich. It's a kind of a long form, about an hour and 15 minutes per episode, where I get in deep with my guests, talking not just topically, but also from a human interest perspective about the background of my guests and what got them involved and the things that they're involved in, which typically most of my guests have some kind of a connection to issues of human rights or religious freedom in South Asia. And then beyond that, you can find my books on Amazon, in print and in Kindle, in print on almost every major Amazon country store which offers the service. Just look me up, Pieter Friedrich, or if you happen to be able to remember the specific name of one of my books, such as the latest one, Saffron America, plug in Saffron America either on Google or on Amazon, and you'll find it there for sale on Amazon. And hope that people give it a read, because not to sound my own horn, but just to be humbly truthful. My books on the Hindu nationalist movement are books unlike any others. There's a lot that has been written on Hindu nationalism, on the RSS, on the BJP, a lot of good books, authors of whom I owe a great debt of gratitude to for their work, because I've used it extensively, quoted them extensively, but most of them are academically oriented and are not easily accessible for your average reader, or especially for your average reader who's not already somewhat familiar with issues related to India. My books on the RSS, BJP, my books on the Hindu nationalist movement, in particular this Saffron America, this latest one, are written and intended to be basically like pop primers for your average educated reader from anywhere in the world to be able to easily digest a complicated issue. And they're books that are intended to be highly accessible for any English-speaking audience who's not already aware of what's happening in India. And they are, and this is the best compliment that I've ever received, and anybody that is a writer, I think, would know why. They are books which I've been told by a reader in the past who is India-based, that my books read like fiction, which to me means that they are engaging, they're not dry, they're oftentimes hopefully page turners, that even though they're talking about real world nonfiction issues, where the truth is stranger than fiction, and I hope that readers find them to be gripping.
Well, this has been another wonderful episode of the DD Geopolitics podcast. I'm Sarah with my wonderful guest host, Kahlissee, and this is just part one of our time with Pieter. So stay around for next one. Thank you.